Hello everyone, my name is Anthony Hine and my project is on searching for optimal strategies in proof-of-stake mining games with perfect randomness. I'm grateful to be advised by Professor Matt Weinberg and PhD candidate Mateus Ferreira. First, I'd like to motivate my project, and for that, I'm going to discuss cryptocurrency consensus protocols. The first and probably the most well-known consensus protocol is the proof of work or POW consensus protocol. In proof of work, what you do is that you present a string S for which the hash over S is less than some target, and then you can mine a block of coins. Now note that the hash function h is non-invertible, so finding string S which meets this inequality is kind of like finding a needle in a haystack. Therefore, the best you could do is to just keep trying random strings over and over again, and it's computing hashes over these random strings that consumes so much electricity. Now the question might be asked, well, exactly how much electricity is consumed by proof of work consensus protocols? To put this into perspective, consider that you took everybody who mined Bitcoin and you put them in their own country. Then this country would be the 33rd most electricity consuming country in the world, ahead of countries like Pakistan, Kazakhstan, Portugal, and Colombia. So we may be encouraged to find alternatives to proof of work that require less electricity. One such alternative may be the proof of stake consensus protocol, which works as follows. At each time step, an external source will choose a coin among all those in circulation, and then if you own that coin that was chosen, you get to mine a block with more coins. As you can see, this avoids millions of computations, and so seems more environmentally friendly. However, it's not enough that this is more environmentally friendly. We have to make sure that it actually is a viable alternative. And thus is the goal of my project, to investigate whether the proof-of-stake consensus protocol is a viable alternative to the proof-of-work consensus protocol. We would like to answer this question from a game theoretic perspective, and so we're going to use a model. More precisely, this model will be a two-player game that models mining cryptocurrency under a proof-of-stake consensus protocol. In this two-player game, we're going to have an attacker that has strength alpha and a defender that has strength 1 minus alpha. Instead of explaining the rules of the game at the outset, we're just going to jump right into it and explain the rules as we go along. At the top left, we have the attacker and the defender's list of hidden blocks, which, at the start of the game, begin empty. Next, we have a table where we're going to record which miner mined which block at each discrete time step. The blockchain at the bottom left, which is just a tree or a graph, is going to keep track of all blocks that are published so far. Finally, in the bottom right, we have the game transcript where we're just going to write what is happening to help you follow along. Suppose that at the first time step, the miner is the defender. So the defender now owns block 1. They then can take an action which adds block 1 to the blockchain by pointing it to block 0. The only rule about adding to the blockchain is that you have to point your block to a block of a lesser value. Suppose that time step 2, the attacker mines the next block, which they've chosen to keep hidden. Let's say that they also mine block 3. Now they decide that they want to publish. They may publish both their blocks by pointing 3 to 2, because 2 is less than 3, and 2 to 0, because 0 is less than 2. Now, note that previously the longest path in the blockchain was block 1 to block 0, with a length of 1. But with this new action, the longest path is now 3 to 2 to 0, with a length of 2. We highlight this because the longest path is used in the calculation of the revenue to the players. The revenue to each player is the proportion of blocks they own in the longest path in the blockchain. We already said that the longest path is 3 to 2 to 0, of which the attacker owns 100% of the blocks, so their revenue is 1. The defender owns no blocks in this longest path, so their revenue is 0. Now, in this mining game, players are supposed to use a strategy which is called the longest chain mining strategy. Whenever you have a block, you just publish it on the longest path. That is, there's not really any hiding. However, it was found out that players can cheat and still do better than the longest chain mining strategy. They call this selfish mining, and it threatens the adoption of the proof-of-stake consensus protocol because people are inherently less trusting of the system if people could cheat. So a question we may have in our pursuit of determining whether the proof-of-stake consensus protocol is a viable alternative to the proof of work is how resilient is this protocol to an attack. We can formally define resilience to be the minimum strength alpha necessary to conduct an attack. The lower the resilience, the easier it is for an attacker to attack the protocol, whereas the higher the resilience, the less likely it is that an attacker can attack the protocol. We'll denote this as alpha raised to the POS. Using this definition of resilience, we can modify our project goal. Now our project goal is to investigate whether the POS consensus protocol is a viable alternative to the POW consensus protocol by bounding alpha raised to the POS, the resilience of the POS consensus protocol. So now we could jump into the prior work. The prior work is primarily due to my advisors Ferrer and Weinberg, who in their paper are able to bound the resilience of the proof-of-stake consensus protocol. First, Ferrer and Weinberg are able to place an upper bound on the resilience of the proof-of-stake consensus protocol by offering a strategy called nothing-at-stake selfish mining. They are also able to place a lower bound on the resilience of the proof-of-stake consensus protocol. They achieve this lower bound by pruning the game tree, which we'll discuss now. In the diagram to follow, a circle represents a game state, a green circle represents a game state where we know the optimal strategy, a blue arrow means that one state follows another because an attacker mined a block, and an orange arrow means that one state follows another because a defender mined a block. So obviously we could start with the starting state of the game, which is just the block 0. Let's suppose that from the initial state, the defender mines the next block. We actually know the optimal strategy from here, so we're going to circle this in green. Let's suppose instead that from the initial state, the attacker mines the first 2 blocks. Again, we know what to do in this case, so we'll circle it in green. Now let's suppose that from the initial state, the attacker mines the first block, the defender mines the second block, and the attacker mines the third block. Again, it's known what to do optimally here, so we'll circle it in green. In fact, the only sequence for which we don't know the optimal strategy is from the initial state, when the attacker mines the first block, and then the defender mines the next 2 blocks. Now we get to the results of my project. Recall the previous bounds on the resilience of the proof-of-stake consensus protocol, namely that it's greater than 0.307 and less than 0.327. Note here on the number line that we have zoomed in on this range. The first result I obtain is an improved upper bound on the resilience of the proof-of-stake consensus protocol. Previously, this upper bound was 0.327, shown by nothing-at-stake selfish mining. Now, using a new strategy I've created called 2-deficit tolerance, I can lower this upper bound to 0.3235. Unfortunately, for more complex strategies, it becomes extremely difficult to analyze them theoretically. This brings me to the second result of my project. I was able to create a proof-of-stake simulator in Python that allows a developer to code up a strategy and then empirically test it against other strategies. It's my hope that this codebase may be a helpful tool for further improving the upper bound on the resilience of the proof-of-stake consensus protocol. My final result is that I'm able to find more states for which we know the optimal strategy. Recall the previous game tree shown. It was said that the only state for which we don't know how to act optimally is the one at the bottom right. Now suppose that from the state, the defender mines several consecutive blocks. Through my work, I'm able to prove the optimal strategy at this state. At a high level, what this result shows is that the attacker is doing so bad that they basically give up. This result can be generalized to any state where the defender goes on a significant mining spree. Using this idea of giving up, I'm able to improve the lower bound on resilience from 0.307 to 0.308. Now let's perhaps go in the other direction. This time, the attacker is going to go on a mining spree, mining blocks 4, 5, and 6. Similarly, I'm able to prove the optimal strategy at this state. The high-level idea behind this proof is that the attacker is doing so good that they're going to be patient until the defender catches up and then kick out the defender's blocks. Unfortunately, this doesn't improve the lower or upper bound on the resilience of the proof-of-stake consensus protocol, although we're hopeful that we could still use this result downstream. Let's recap the results of this project. The prior literature has showed that the resilience is somewhere between 0.307 and 0.327. By creating different strategies such as 2-deficit tolerance, as well as further pruning the game tree, I'm able to improve both bounds by bringing the lower bound up to 0.308 and lowering the upper bound down to 0.3235. Although these results are numerically small, they can be put into perspective when you consider that for a miner to improve their strength by as little as 0.001, this still costs about $935 million. So improving these bounds as we have is pretty hopeful, and we hope that we could tighten this still further.